Hey guys, today we are in the book of Genesis chapter 20. Now, we just finished with Sodom and Gomorrah getting destroyed, and then it goes instantly to saying that Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negeb to live between Kadesh and Shur. This is the southern part of Israel, kind of desert country, really. We don't know why he moved. Maybe Abraham did not want to look over the valley in which Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. We don't really know, but we know that Abraham left. And as he left, something happens that we've already read about. You know, he didn't learn from his prior engagements. And so we see in verse 2, Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." We've seen this before, Genesis chapter 12, starting in verse 10, where he goes to king and he tells him, "This is my sister. You can have him. You can have her and add her into your harem, into your group of women and wives." And during that night, we see that King Abimelech had a dream. God came to him in the dream and said, "You're going to die, and everyone in your family is going to die." The king comes to you and says, "Wait a minute, I didn't do anything." Abraham says that she is his sister, and she told me that Abraham is his brother. So here we see that once again, Abraham is telling a lie. He is sinning, and Sarah is telling the lie. She is sinning. But notice it says, in verse 5, "In the integrity of my heart, in the innocence of my hands, I have done this." Abimelech is telling God, a pagan king is telling God, "Hey, I didn't do this. This wasn't my sin. They said they were brother and sister, so I took them in. I didn't do this. They lied to me, so they've done this to me." And we see in verse 6, God says, "I know. I know that you were honest in your dealings." And we see, "I am the one who kept you from sinning." God kept a pagan king from sinning. He put him under his protection and allowed him not to bring on this tragedy that would happen if they were to do this. And so God tells him, "Return the man's wife, for he is a prophet," which is interesting. Think about the position that God is in, right? God's man, God's prophet, God's mouthpiece. Abraham is lying to this pagan king, and now God has to come to this pagan king and say, "Yeah, Abraham, my man, my mouthpiece, he lied, he sinned, he did all this. Return him because he's still my man, he's still my prophet." That just shows you that how great God really is, the grace and mercy that comes from God. That even though Abraham sinned and put God in this position, God didn't let him go. God didn't remove his promise to him. God kept him and sustained his promise. So, verse 8, Abimelech rose early in the morning and did all of these things, told his men, and Abimelech called Abraham and said, "What have you done to us?" Just as back in Genesis chapter 12, the pagan king confronted Abraham and said, "How could you sin?" Once again, chapter 20, a pagan king is confronting God's man and saying, "How could you do this to us?" Notice in verse 10, Abimelech said to Abraham, "What did you see that you did this thing?" This is a great question. This pagan king is saying, "What was your eyes focused on? Was your eyes focused on God, on your God, that you would allow this sin and all of this tragedy to come in this?" Of course, his eyes weren't focused on God. And so Abraham says, verse 11, he says, "I did it because I thought there was no fear of God in this place." He's making an excuse. He said, "I lied because I didn't think that you fear God." But in reality, the fear of God was absent from Abraham, not from the pagan king Abimelech. Also in verse 12, it says, "Besides, she is indeed my sister." And he'll go on to explain that she is his half sister. Once again, even though he's been caught, he's still trying to deceive. He's not telling the full truth. And if it's not the full truth, it's a lie, right? A half truth is a lie. And so we see here that Sarah is the daughter of my father, though she is not the daughter of my mother. So she is his half sister. And notice in verse 13, and when God calls me to wander from my father's house. Here, not only is he saying, I thought the fear of God wasn't from you. Not only is he saying, well, she's my sister, kind of, but now he says, when God calls me to wander. This is a Adam and Eve move, right? He's kind of putting a little blame on God. When God calls me to move, well, then this is when we did this, right? So you see over and over again, Abraham sins, and is not taking the accountability of his sin. Notice what Abimelech does. He took sheep, oxen, servants, male servants, female servants, and gave them to Abraham and returned Sarah, his wife, untouched. And so here Abimelech takes the high road. He gives him tons of generosity. Basically, the New Testament talks about it's dumping burning coal on top of his head, that he would bring so much distrust and honest to King Abimelech, and Abimelech basically just smothers him in kindness and generosity and bestows all these gifts on him. Verse 16, notice this, and Sarah, he said, the king Abimelech is talking to Sarah, and this is what he says: behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. You can imagine if we was there, right? You can imagine King Abimelech says, hey, Sarah, I've given your brother, right, 1,000 pieces of silver, as along with the goats, the servants, all the other things, right? So you can see the irony here in this situation, right? King Abimelech is making fun of Abraham and all of his excuses that he has done. And after he did this, Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and healed his wife and his female slaves, because just as God told him in his dream that they were going to die and he was going to end his family, now God listened to the prayers of Abraham, even though he sinned. But God once again kept his promise, and he healed the line of Abimelech. And so you might ask yourself, where is Jesus in all of this? I think it's pretty easy to say, even though Abraham sinned, what happens? God forgives him. God gives him mercy and grace, the thing in which Jesus came to give us, mercy and grace. Hope that makes sense. We'll see you tomorrow in chapter 21. God bless.